Okay. All right. We're learning the Rebbe's talk on we're learning the laws of Shabbos, and we're in the middle of the laws of Eiruv Chatzeiros towards the end. We should finish it this week. Hey, Rebecca. Let's bring up this text. Okay, so we're in chapter 94 in the laws of Eiruv Chatzeiros. Let's make sure everyone got it. Yeah. So we're on law number 24, Chav Dalet. So it says as follows. Again, so now we're going to get to the question of, we've in the past few weeks, we've identified what is an Eiruv Chatzeiros, and very nicely Aaron sent us a picture of the Eiruv outside his or nearby his home. That's a regular Eiruv. The Eiruv Chatzeiros is again the courtyards that are already courtyards, meaning to say it's not that it's a question if they're public domain or private domain. They don't have to be made into private domain. They are a private domain, even if there's the walls surrounded four sides, all nice and good. But because there's different people that live in this chutzner, in the courtyard, which is how a courtyard is, which again applies to buildings, apartment buildings, joint homes, but there's separate apartments or separate quarters in that place. So in order, even though it's considered a private domain, in order to take from your private space, like the house, into the courtyard, things that are in the house to take the courtyard, and from the courtyard into the house, you must make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, and this was instituted by Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, as a gzeira to make sure people should remember the laws of Shabbos. The actual prohibition of carrying in a public domain or in a Carmelis, or from a private domain to a Carmelis or public domain, is both biblical or rabbinic. Shlomo Melech added a takana that even in a biblical and halachic private domain, one still needs to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros to join the members of the courtyard, to make them one, and this kind of brings a consciousness and awareness about Shabbos. So now the question comes in that we've been talking about over and over again. So if we make an Eiruv, and an Eiruv is we make a private domain, we make a city, let's say the city of Jerusalem has an Eiruv, and the city of Tel Aviv has an Eiruv. All main cities in Eretz Yisrael have an Eiruv, and places in the United States and in Europe that have Eiruvs in large communities, spaces, or cities, Manhattan, Brooklyn, etc. Seattle has an Eiruv, Los Angeles, so Florida. So if you make an Eiruv, and the Eiruv makes the house, the area into private domain, so i.e., let's say one big chutzner, one big courtyard. So then obviously, just like in every courtyard, you have to have an Eiruv Chatzeiros. You have to have the courtyard Eiruv, which is on top of the private, aside for the fact that the place was turned into a private domain. How does that work in large communities? So here, we tackled that in law number 24. Baharba Kehilais, there are many communities. Misaknin kol hamevois v'arachayves be'ervin. They make all the alleyways and the streets into an Eiruv, meaning here we mean a private domain, to turn it into an Eiruv, like the Eiruv we have, let's say, in Seattle or in Brooklyn, etc. The Hainu b'tzuras haPesach v'kadoima, that they make the system of making the tzuras haPesach. Tzuras haPesach means the frame or the form by installing the form of a door. So if you have two poles and a rope and a string, and so if they're using, let's say, the telephone wires, you have two poles and a string. That's a tzuras haPesach. That's a door. A door is made up of two sides and a doorpost. So if you make a tzuras haPesach, so we're here not to discuss the laws of Eiruv, how to make an Eiruv. Hey, Julie. So we've made an Eiruv in a community. We still have another problem. Even if we make an Eiruv, a regular Eiruv, to make it in a private domain, but just like in a chutzner, in a courtyard, if there's Gentiles that live in the courtyard, you must rent a space, like we learned last week. It's not enough just to have a private domain. That every part of the private domain has to be private, and either there's all people that are Shabbos observant in there, or the people that are not Shabbos observant, or if they're Gentiles and not don't have to be Shabbos observant, then they have to rent out their space, as we learned last week. So it's basically as if the only members of the courtyard are the people who keep Shabbos, because the idea is in order for the courtyard, I mean, what Shlomo Melech really created was that we want to kind of make the courtyard like one big kitchen, one big house, and therefore one big house where everyone together keeps Shabbos and everyone together eats together. That symbolizes with the Eiruv Chatzeiros, the food that we said, the matzahs and the other foods that we put together, and kind of unites this as a group of people that keep Shabbos, and this keeps the Shabbos awareness. But if you have people that are not keeping the Shabbos as part of that group, so they have to rent their space out. So because if they're going to live in the place and not have anything to do with, so to say, this union, and they can't join the union if they're not keeping Shabbos, so then they have to rent out their space so they don't become a obstacle to this union. So what are you doing that's in a courtyard is okay, right? You have 5 people, one of them is a Gentile or 2 of them are Gentile. So so you figure it out. You make a deal with them. How do you do it? How do we work it out in a large city or a large space? So he says that the community rents out the place from the Gentiles, as we learned in last week. So you carry in the city, not to be able to carry because it makes it a private domain, to be able to carry it because of the problem of Eiruv Chatzeiros. So here the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says this is not something for the regular person to rely on themselves learning the laws. This has to be organized and taken care of, and the responsibility of the rabbi. And he says the rabbi himself has to be a mumcha, has to be an expert in these laws. Not everyone's an expert in and well versed in the laws of Eruvin. So in these places where they have an Eruv, and with an Eiruv, they set up the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Again, the thing is like this. If you have, let's say, like we've taken the video of right down the road from me. If you walk outside my house and I walk outside my office right here, you go downstairs, you cross the street, there's a chutzner, your classic chutzner, which is Batei Ram, that has walls around it and has houses inside it and has a shul and a mikvah. And in theory, no, you don't have to leave that space on Shabbos because you have your shul, you have your mikveh, your food, or you can't go shopping anyways. So of course you could go to the park. No one's stopping you from leaving. But if you decide to stay, it's okay. So there's no reason really for you to get out. So nevertheless, even though all the members there are Jewish and all the members there are Shabbos observant, nevertheless they have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. Then across the outside of that Chatzer Batei Ran is a mavui, is an alley lane. Outside and the other side of the alley lane is another chutzner, another courtyard from another group of people, similar to the one that is in Batei Ran. Also a shul and also together and also covered up and all that. So now the point is that if you want to join that the 2 courtyards themselves can carry between each other, so we've learned you have to have a shituf. Meaning to say is that you make the alleyway, which is the combined space, that you make a union between the different courtyards via the alleyway, and you have one Eiruv Chatzeiros in your courtyard. You extend that to the shituf, and then it makes it one big space for everyone to carry. But now you can't do that in a large city like New York or Seattle or even Yerushalayim. To sit there, make a shituf and join all the courtyards, because then you have spaces that are not courtyards. So what do? We turn it to one big courtyard. So there's no different courtyards and alleyways. So in this case, you have an expert rabbi, you have an expert Eiruv. On top of that, you have to have an Eiruv Chatzeiros. Where do you put the Eiruv Chatzeiros? Where do you keep it? You have to keep it somewhere. So we learned in an apartment building, this designated apartment that holds the key, the Eiruv Chatzeiros. So he says, the custom is that the Eiruv Chatzeiros is kept in the synagogue, in the shul. Because everyone has access. Everyone can go into the shul. And it doesn't have to be specifically in someone's private home. So what they do is they have the Eiruv Chatzeiros in a shul, and that's on behalf of the big chutzner, which is the whole space of the Eiruv, and that's how we do it, and that's how we do it till today. Okay, let's see the footnotes. In many communities, he says they make a doorpost. Again, the doorpost is not about the Eiruv Chatzeiros. I just wanted, because last time we were learning, Aaron was getting confused. There's 2 stages here. There's to make the Carmelites into a private domain. You have to privatize it. That's with the Tzuras HaPesach. That's with making sticks and the string on top. And then on top of that, you have to have the Eiruv Chatzeiros. So he says that consists of 2 posts, 10 tefachim high, with a crossbeam or wire over them, like this. There's no picture. We don't see the picture. But the idea is basically 2 poles and a wire on top. We've showed it before when we learned it a few months before on the laws of Eruvin. Such a structure is considered a solid wall, and you may carry in the enclosed area if the Eiruv requirements are fulfilled. So all the other requirements that have to be fulfilled, that makes it into private domain. Many people choose not to rely on a Tzuras HaPesach to carry on Shabbos. See Bir Halacha 364 and the Mishnah Berurah. So here he's saying that not everyone agrees not to be to hold, it's God forbid also, but not everyone wants to hold by the Eiruv, right? Everyone knows that one of the long conversations always is, do you hold by the Eiruv? Do you carry on Shabbos? So now people don't want to use that. Why? Because at the end of the day, the Tzuras HaPesach that creates a blocked space is not exactly 100% equal in vision, or the way it doesn't have the same seemingly effect physically of a wall, right? Because in the city like Yerushalayim, the fact that there's a Tzuras HaPesach across the whole city, or New York, doesn't stop people from cars from driving in and out. Again, that's not necessary. You could have a city that has doors and people come in and out. But again, there are people, he just says, there are people who don't want to rely on the Tzuras HaPesach that make it a Eiruv. Therefore, again, so when Aaron sent the pictures last week of the Eiruv in his area, although also they're using a Tzuras HaPesach, but they're using it also to have it in a much smaller space, and therefore they feel much more comfortable with that kind of small space. Again, you would need to have a second Eiruv Chatzeiros, as I assume. We'll see in a second. Okay, so he says, since it must be rented, again, so what do? They organize with all the non-Jews in this area, in the Eiruv. Like we learned last week, since it must be rented from all the non-Jews, it may be rented from the mayor of the city. So this is what we discussed when I was talking with Rebecca and others, that this is how we do it today is, how could you go in city in Seattle or Brooklyn or New York and ask every Gentile to rent you their space? That's not possible. It's not feasible. And what happens if one person not? So what they've worked out is that the mayor of the city represents all the non-Shabbos observant people, including the Shabbos observant. But on behalf of the non-Shabbos observant people and Gentiles, the mayor of the city, he or she, or their office, could speak on their behalf and make a deal, so to say, with the Eiruv committee to make it that you can make the Eiruv Chatzeiros. He is in effect a public servant of all the non-Jews in the city. Again, like we said last week, this renting is not exactly renting. You're not paying $3,000 for the guy's place, for the fellow or the woman's place as a regular renting. It's a kind of symbolic renting where the person's giving you, so to say, his so almost to say his power to object, to not be part of the Eiruv, that he shouldn't be a deterrent to the Eiruv. And that the mayor could represent. Means the mayor, of course, can't sell your house. I mean, obviously, there's laws. You have to check the laws of every city. But there's obviously not just by any chance a mayor could come in and walk into your house. I mean, the mayor's office has certain rights to the city, but certain rights are private, and depending on the constitution of the city. But nevertheless, the mayor, on behalf of what's required for the Eiruv, on that the mayor can represent and rent out the space on behalf of all the Gentiles, to organize it with the Eiruv committee that would permit for the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Again, not to confuse the Eiruv of carrying and the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Okay, so this is how we get around the issue of the renting out from the Gentiles or anyone. So the mayor's office, or the whatever the office of the area that there's an Eiruv, that office represents all the members of the Eiruv, where the Eiruv is, and therefore, this is not something that's concept. Whoever is part of the Eiruv committee has to have some sort of meeting, I'm assuming, with the mayor office, discuss it, and it's already something that's been going on for, this is already, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch talking, it's going on for many years, I mean, even prior to the Jewish people coming to the United States, where there's a representative of the community, of the city, or of the area, that on behalf of all the non-Shabbos observant people or the Gentiles comes and says, listen, that space is rented out, and therefore it's not a problem for you to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, and therefore even if you make an Eiruv and make one big Chatzer, you would have a Eiruv Chatzeiros in place. Okay. What about only in a city that has an Eiruv? What about a city that doesn't have an Eiruv? Even he says, so if the Eiruv is an Eiruv of a big place, and there's a lot of communities, and in that community, in that space, is a big Eiruv, and you have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. So we said, where do you keep the Eiruv Chatzeiros? In the synagogue. However, in a place where there's no Eiruv, so even if you want to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, means you're not using an Eiruv to make a large private domain, but you want to have a chatzer, you have a courtyard, you have an apartment building. Then it's not you can't keep the Eiruv in the shul, because if it's a more smaller place where we know who the people are. So basically, according to this, if let's say you have a shul in an apartment building, that's not a crazy concept. And you have an apartment building, and there's no Eiruv, or you're not considering the Eiruv. You don't hold by the Eiruv, right? So you have the Eiruv, your private domain is the apartment building. You make an Eiruv Chatzeiros to the members of the apartment building, like we saw the letter to the chief rabbi of Crown Heights. They kept the Eiruv Chatzeiros in someone's home. Even if there's a shul in the Chatzar, you can't keep the Eiruv in the Chatzar. So let's see the footnote why. He says, look at the Machzas HaShekel. It doesn't go into it of the reason why. I think the reason is basically because if it's mamash a chatzir, just one courtyard, and it's one courtyard, and there's an Eiruv Chatzeiros there, so then we know who everyone is. Keep it in an apartment where people are actually someone's living. It doesn't say they really. We have to look. It says, look in the Machzas HaShekel in the name of the Chacham Tzvi. You have to check. I want to check what the reason is. I don't want to give an assumption what the reason is. Let me check what the reason is, and we'll get back to everyone on the reason. It doesn't. I mean, seemingly the reason is because if it's a smaller group of people, then it's easier. It's more. It should be with a proper. It should be in a proper home. Where when you have a large Eiruv, it's not really a chatzir. It's right. You're just creating this idea of a chatzir. So therefore, like he says, in Indian of Shituf, it's kind of a combined space with the shul. But when proper private domain, it has to be properly set up at the proper home, because the idea is to affect the people that are living. Hold on. All right, Ariel wants everyone to know that the Knicks are making a very big comeback for those who care. Okay. Thank you, Ariel. God bless you. Again, we're not taking sides here because we have other people. Julie's on the sides of the Spurs. So may the best person win. All right, let's continue. Okay. Now he says, what happens? This could happen. We've experienced this here in Yerushalayim a few years ago when the Eruv was being disrupted right before Shabbos every single week. So here he said like this: Iram tukenes be'eruvim v'niskalkal eruv Shabbos. Let's say you have an Eruv. Again, the Eiruv is the Eiruv to make it a private domain. So let's say you have the Eiruv in Yerushalayim. Anyone who goes to Yerushalayim, so you don't see it so much. It's not so easy to see in America, the Eiruv. But if you go into Eretz Yisrael, you can see the Eiruv. They're not using the telephone poles. They're using special metal poles. And you see on the top of every metal pole, there's a string. They're not using the telephone wires. And the lechis, the ones in America are kind of, telephone wires, lechis, again, we're not learning the laws of how to make a private domain. But in Eretz Yisrael, there's literally, within every 10 amas, there's a metal pole, and on top of it, there's a string. And that poles and strings surrounds, let's say, the city of Jerusalem and creates an Eiruv. What happens if the Eiruv falls? So the problem is, what's the question? If the Eiruv falls, so now you don't have a chatzir anymore. There's no courtyard, because the Eiruv creates the courtyard. See, the likelihood of my neighbor down the street over here from their walls collapsing is unlikely. It's a proper chutzner. It's a courtyard with a wall. And there's 20 families or 30 families that live in it for the past 200 years. That's the courtyard. It's called Schlüsselgeld. No one really owns that place. It's just the keys get passed over. But what about in a big city where there's an Eiruv? And the Eiruv is minskalkel ha'Eiruv b'Shabbos, the Eiruv falls. Oz kol ha'chatzeros shehem kitikunan ve'ein behem pritza ha'iseres afilu yesh b'chatzer kama batim utar mutal tasham kol eser Shabbos. The question is, okay, now you can't carry, if you find out that the Eiruv drops, Eiruv is not one of the Eiruv. See, we've learned before when it comes to Eiruv Chatzeiros and Eiruv Tchumim that there is a concept of how you enter into Ben Hashmoshes. That if you enter into Shabbos in a certain way, then it stays. But that doesn't apply to the Eiruv, the regulator. If it's no courtyard, it's a public domain. If the wall falls down, it's not a private domain anymore. The wall keeps it private. So if the Eiruv is the wall and there's no Eiruv, there's no more private domain. But again, let's say if the Chatzar were to fall, if the Eiruv were to fall down in Yerushalayim, and if the Eiruv falls down in Yerushalayim, so now that you can't carry in the streets of Jerusalem. But if you live in a Chatzar, you could still carry because your place has always been a private domain. The problem is that your own Chatzar never made an Eiruv Chatzeiros because you relied on the general Eiruv Chatzeiros that the city made in the mayor's office and the synagogue. So what the question is, can I carry around my courtyard from my house into my courtyard? There's no Eiruv Chatzeiros there because I relied on the general Eiruv Chatzeiros and now the Eiruv is not up. So that's the question. You have an Eiruv in the city, and the Eiruv falls. So now the streets you can't carry, but you still have a courtyard. The courtyards that are properly still standing, obviously, they don't have a breach that would forbid them from carrying. Even if there's many people in that chutzner, you can still carry. Even if the Eiruv Chatzeiros that you were relying on is no longer part of your chutzner because it was part of the general chutzner collapsed. Says Mikol Makayim Mutter, you're still allowed to carry Mishum Del Inin Ze'amrinon Shabbos Kivin De Hutra because when you entered into Shabbos, it was permissible. Once it's permissible, it stays permissible. Which means to say that if the Eiruv falls, if you find out that the Eiruv falls before Shabbos, then that's something else, seemingly. Even sheyesh chash gadol shlo yikashlu rabim lasis gam b'makom sheneser. Kevin shehuglu beheter. Akein im efshel sakna idei ein Yehudi muter. So the problem is, now he says another thing, that because there's a great concern that the masses are going to end up carrying in a forbidden way, because not everyone knows the Eiruv fell down. Because also they're used to carrying, everyone knows to carry. So therefore, even if now it goes to the laws of the Eiruv. If you could get a Gentile to fix the Eiruv, have them fix the Eiruv. Because like this, even though you're not supposed to have a Gentile do something for you on Shabbos, but here, that Amir al-Nachi, or that idea of a Gentile doing something for you on Shabbos, is minor compared to the idea that people are going to end up carrying and violating the Shabbos. And he says, if the string from the door, meaning the string on top of the poles, was torn and it's possible by a non-Jew to repair it with a loop or making a knot and a loop over it, so much the better, meaning to say that in a way that's not so of a not making so much of a tikkun of a fixing, that's better if it doesn't have to do a proper work. Which basically would mean, again, I don't know I'm not a part of an Eiruv committee and I'm not an expert in Eiruvin, but I could tell you, I could assume based on this, like I said in Yerushalayim, whoever they have that they pay, let's say a Gentile, to check the Eiruv even through Shabbos, if he was to find something wrong with the Eiruv, it would be better for him to fix the Eiruv than for him to just ignore it and say, well, it's not, I can't do something for them on Shabbos, because then that would that would have people that don't know end up carrying. Again, it's not something that doesn't happen. It could happen all the time. In Erev, bad weather, there's many reasons why an Erev could fall. There could be a storm, and if there's a storm, the storm could cause a tree to fall and the Erev to collapse. Okay. Footnote number 68. Okay. So it's like this: the courtyards that are standing, they could still carry based on the Eruv, even if the Eruv is no longer kept, the Eiruv Chatzeiros is no longer kept in their synagogue. So he says like this in their courtyard. He says that is if the whole of the wall is broken down, or if the majority of the wall is broken down, or there is a breach more than 10 amas width in one wall. These are the general rules, but a posek must be consulted every time these halachos are involved. So he says that this idea that, first of all, that the Eruv collapses, you can't just be an opinion of your own. The breach that collapses, you have to ask an expert to know if actually the Eruv is no longer kosher or not. That's to tell others that they can and cannot carry. He says that given the hutra, once it's permitted, this is true only if it is open to another private domain. But if it is open to a public domain or carmelis, you may not continue to carry in your court. I'm assuming that what he's saying over here is, let's see, what he's saying over here is, I'm assuming, let's just see, even if the Eruv deposited in another premise was now separate from the courtyard, nonetheless they may be permitted to carry because regardless if you say once it's permitted, it's permitted. I'm going to go on a limb and say that I think what he's talking about over here is that the courtyard is not open to a carmelis or public domain, but only open to another private domain. I guess it would have to be open to private domain all the way to the Eiruv Chatzeiros, because I think he's talking about the courtyard, not that the shul with the. I guess it would be the same thing. If there has to be basically that there's no exposure to a public and private domain because you have no Eiruv Chatzeiros now, even though the Eiruv Chatzeiros is really permitting you to carry within the courtyard itself. Unless I'm mistaken, and we're talking about that where the Eiruv Chatzeiros is not exposed to a courtyard or carmelets. Okay, I have to check on that one as well. 71 is like this. Therefore, it is possible to have it repaired by non-Jew. Okay. Even if this requires doing malachat daraisa, even if the non-Jew has to do a biblical prohibition, but he's a non-Jew, he's allowed to do it, but he's doing it for the Jew, or for the community. So he says, even if it's a malachat daraisa, as is evident from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the Chai Adam and the Mishnah Brura Ramah, this ruling is based on the Itur who permits this because it is a mitzvah involved the public. Because it's a mitzvah involved in the rabbim are dependent on it. The public, the community is dependent on it. Therefore, it's permitted even for them to do a biblical transaction. Julie, you wanted to ask a question? Your hand is up.
Yeah, this might be a really dumb question, but how do you know if it's torn or broken? Is there someone who, do you know what I mean? Like,
no. So you're right. If you don't know, you don't know. You don't have to.
okay.
You don't have to assume it's broken or up. Listen, you have some times where the word goes out. It's obviously, word spreads. I've been in Yerushalayim where either word goes out right before Shabbos or word goes out during Shabbos that the Eruv is found. Someone will know and word spreads like wildfire. Now, you have sometimes a situation where let's say there's a tremendous storm. Again, let's say in Seattle, many times has issues with the Eruv, again, because it's a heavy weather city, and therefore
Right.
it's very possible for trees to fall and break a wire and what have you. Do they have to be concerned with every time there's a storm that maybe it fell? No. You know, I mean, unless it's not, I don't know. Again, I'm not part of the Eruv committee, so I don't know what the rough paskins. But I'm quite certain that going to Shabbos knowing the Eruv is up, we assume it's still up, even if there's a great storm. I don't think that we have to concern that maybe it fell down.
Okay.
In Seattle, for instance, we have a Gentile who's on the team of the Eruv. Should he drive around and check throughout Shabbos? Possibly. And if you should fix it according to the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, yes. What do you say? These some shows have a red and green light. Yeah, the red and green light only applies for Erev Shabbos. It's based on what they know Erev Shabbos. I don't think they changed the red and green. My Seattle also has that. You have a green flag that means the Erev is up. The red flag means the Erev is down. I don't believe they change flags in the middle of Shabbos. I don't think so. Again, I'm not part of the Erev community. I don't know what the ruling on that is. But I think that if you don't know and you've heard the Erev is up, in our group in Seattle, there's a WhatsApp group. Erev Shabbos, an hour before Shabbos, we'll get a message from the president of the shul saying that the Erev is up. If it's not up, we'll say it's not up. Once that message goes out, you can assume it's up unless you know otherwise.
Yeah, if it happens like, right in the middle of Shabbos, are your friends going to tell you? That's such a goofy.
No. If you hear and you know it's down, you can't carry.
Right.
But that's why they say that if you have a Gentile that's able to fix it, that's the best solution because not everyone's going to find out.
Okay. Right.
Okay. Again, so I just try to go back to footnote number 69. Again, I think it means that the courtyard. This is because why is footnote 69 bothering me a bit? Because it's a big difference. Basically, let's say an apartment building. If you have an apartment building and you don't have an Eruv in your apartment building, let's say Rebecca, you live in Manhattan, you have an apartment building. There's no Eruv as far as you know in your apartment building. So if for whatever reason word goes out on Shabbos that the Eiruv Chatzeiros, the Eruv is down in Manhattan, so you would not be able to carry in your apartment building from things that are from your house into your apartment building if you don't have an Eiruv Chatzeiros there. Why? Because in footnote 69 it says this is only true if it's not open to Carmelis, but every apartment building is open to Carmelis. In Manhattan, right? You go outside, that's a Carmelis. It's not a Rosh Hashanah. So I'm saying it's a Carmelis. So therefore, you go out to the street, you go off on Fifth Avenue, so you're going to the street. So if that's what he means, it means if he's talking about the house, the Chatzir, not the place where the Eruv is, if the Eruv is in a shul, and if the Eruv is in a shul, there you go. Sorry, Spurs fans. It looks like the next one. So if you're talking about the shul, that's something else because the shul could be in a courtyard, and then it saves everything. But I don't think so. I think it's talking about the apartment building itself. I'll have to check again. All right, which means basically you should have a backup for Eiruv Chatzeiros. Not that it happens often, but in case it does. Alrighty. Chav Zayin, law number 27. Imcha Yamtiv Erev Shabbos v'niskalkal oz Erev. Let's say Friday is Yamtiv, and then Shabbos, like this year Shavuos, right? Shavuos this year was Friday Shabbos. So if you have Friday and then Shabbos, so you have Friday is is Erev is Yamtiv, like this year Shavuos, and then comes Shabbos. V'niskalkal oz Erev. And the Erev falls on Friday. Even though the Erev usually works for things that you may need the Erev for, if in case you need an Erev for things that are not food related. We don't say now that because your Erev fell down and because you relied on the Shul's Erev, it applies for Shabbos. That only applies if it happens on Shabbos itself. But the 2 days of Yom Tov and Shabbos are two separate holidays, or two separate things. And because they're two separate things, so therefore, what happens on the first day Yom Tov has nothing to do with Shabbos. The two sanctities. So therefore, characters of holiness. Therefore, for Yom Tov, we could say it was okay. It lasted because you went into Yom Tov, the Erev was up, and it was permissible. but it wasn't permissible for Shabbos yet. And by the time Shabbos came in, it was down. Okay. 72. If Yom Tov occurs on Erev Shabbos and Erev becomes defective. Okay. If it breaks on Yom Tov, you may not ask a non-Jew to repair it on Yom Tov, for this is not a great necessity as on the Shabbos. Okay. The problem with the challenge of this Magen Avram is that the Magen Avram says that if the Erev breaks on Yom Tov, because the Erev itself, you're allowed to carry in Yom Tov. Because for Ochel Nefesh, you're allowed to carry. You don't need an Erev to carry on Yom Tov for most things. So for the Gentile to fix you on Yom Tov is not necessary. So therefore, he's not allowed to fix it. Now the question is, now Shabbos happens. Is the Gentile allowed to fix it on Shabbos, or the Gentile's only allowed to fix it on Shabbos if it was up on Erev Shabbos and now it fell? But now that it's already fallen, you know it's fallen on Yom Tov, maybe he's not allowed to do it, then it creates even a further problem. Okay, number 73. We do not say, since it was permitted on Yom Tov to carry objects that were not needed on Yom Tov, because of the principle of once it was permitted on that day, it continues to be permitted, it should therefore also be permitted on Shabbos. We don't apply that rule. 74, the different holinesses, see Magen Avram. Okay. So we're going to stop here on these laws. We'll go a little bit before we go to the next chapter. Just wanted to know if there's any. This closes our subject of past few weeks of the laws of Eiruv Chatzeiros, and I believe that we're a little more clever. I mean, meaning to say that we have an idea of what should be done. The bottom line is, as far as going forward, again, we don't find it, as far as I know, the custom that people have to set up their own Eiruv Chatzeiros for the concern, even though it's not a great concern, that maybe the Eiruv is going to fall. Because again, according to the footnote number 69, if I understand it correctly, if the Eiruv Chatzeiros if the Eiruv falls down and you find that it fell down, and you have no Eiruv Chatzeiros in your apartment building, and your apartment building opens up to a Carmelist, you cannot carry. So I have to check why there is not this. I thought I saw that when I prepared this class that it did say that a person should have a backup plan and have a Eiruv Chatzeiros just in case the general Eiruv falls. It doesn't seem to say that. Maybe it's over here. Hold on a second. This question that we have over here is the question from the Rav about Mazel Tov Ariel. This is hold on. Okay, it's the case if the neighbor leaves the house. Hold on, I'll see if I thought I saw somewhere that said that it's best to have a second Eiruv Chatzeiros up. I have to check that. Okay, we have to check that about if I mean, because again, it's not customary, not that I know of. I know I don't have one in my building. Again, it's not so complicated to make it, but I just don't know that that's the custom of people to have an Eiruv Chatzeiros privately just in case the Eiruv falls down. Okay. Now we're going to the laws of Erev Tchumim. Erev Tchumim is yesterday.
So if you're looking at a place like sorry, I have allergies that are so bad right now. But if you're looking at a place like Texas, which has so much empty space, empty land, and there's a city that's not even built yet. I mean, there's a city, but there's nothing built. Is it harder to create, an Erev in a place that there's no existing buildings? Or is it easier or harder? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the problem is in the laws of Eruvin, there's making an Eruv. There's what's called, let's say, we have we call the valleys, which is like large open spaces larger than the courtyards of the temple. That large open space is not inhabited properly. Then even if it's surrounded, it's still not an Erev Chatzeiros. It means it has to be a place loder, a place where at least people live. The question is,
right,
even if you have a lot of open space, let's say even now in the suburbs where there's a lot of space between houses,
Mm-hmm.
even in established places, not like that. Even in, let's say, New England, as long as there's three people living in that space, that then it could become privatized. But the question is if in fact there are three people living in that space. But that's a
Okay.
good question. If there's very large spaces of open space and there's just one person here and then 2 miles down there's another person, it creates a
Uh,
big problem to make an Erev.
right,
Okay.
right. Okay.
Now we're going to learn the laws of Erev Tchum. Erev Tchum is a bigger problem. It's not such a problem for people that live in really populated cities, but if you don't live like Julie was saying in a place of Texas, you can't just walk anywhere on Shabbos. I was in the Golan Heights a few years ago. Again, I when you live in a city, you're not aware of these things. There's no such thing as like going to Seattle and you have to worry about Erev Tchum. Why? Because it's unlikely you're going to get you're going to hold on. Someone's trying to get in. Oh, Aaron wants to come in. He's not going to talk about the Knicks. Aaron, welcome. No talking sports. So the possibility in a place like New York or Seattle to walk out of your tchum is unlikely. Although there's the question if you want to cross the bridge, we talked about that crossing the bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge or the Manhattan Bridge, could be that you're walking out of your tchum. But usually in most places you don't have the question. You know, you live in a place, it's populated. But if you're going for camping for Shabbos, or you're going out to the mountains for Shabbos, you can't just walk anywhere. So like I said, I was in the Golan Heights and we were taking a walk, you know, along Shabbos, and the person said, this is as far as you could walk. You can't walk past it because this is out of the tchum. So these are the laws of Erev Tchum. It means to stay within your space on Shabbos. And this again has nothing to do with public domain or private domain, it has nothing to do with carrying. A person's not allowed to go out of the tchum, out of the boundary. And what is the boundary? We're going to learn about it now. Asr laseis v'Shabbos v'yom tovim makom sheshavas. A place, Shabbos means, the word Shabbos also means Shabbos, to rest. Where you've established your place of resting, that's your place for Shabbos, gives you a certain amount of space to walk around. Also, you can't leave that space. Yoiser mitchum, from the place, Shuhu Shnei Apayim Amma, which is out of, and your space is 4 amas. So your space is 4 amas. Out of your space, 200 amas, let's say 300 square feet. All right, so 300 feet, you're not allowed to go 300 feet. Now, if you're going to go from your space, you could go 2,000 amas one way, 2,000 amas the other way. We're going to learn about if let's say a person needs to go not 4,000 amas, but 3,800 amas. So what did we say? Where your space is, where your shavas is, where you rest, you have 2,000 amas. The rabbis instituted an ability to move that space to some, so to say, a conceptual space by putting food. Let's say your tchum, you have a house, and you want to walk 3,800 feet, amas. So you go from your house, which is in, let's say, middle of nowhere. So you're not in a city. So you go from your house, a little less than 2,000 amas. You put food there, which establishes that's your dwelling place. And then you could walk, let's say you put it north of your house. So then you could walk north from that place where you put the Erev Tchumim, another 2,000. So then the place where you put the food becomes the space. And then you have 2,000 amas from the food. The downside is you can't walk from the food is the 2,000 amas. So if your house is, let's say, 1,800 amas, means you could only go south 200 amas, not 2,000, because you've kind of relocated your place to being further north, even though you're sleeping where you're in your home. This is the system of Erev Tchumim. So there's first the laws of Tchumim. You're not allowed to leave your space. The question is, how could I move my space? So before Shabbos, you could put food further out and make that your established place. Now again, this only applies to a place that's outside of a dwelling place. A city is one big 4 amas. So, and the city expands wherever there's people living, not just the city borders. So the city, as long as there's people within 2,000 amas that are living in the city, so that's what I'm saying, to get out of the city, of where no one's living, it's difficult if you live in a regular city. If you live out in the mountains, it's something that can be common, an issue. Yes, Aaron.
What if you camping just happened and it's a big windstorm and it blows your food too far, like out of
Okay,
the Amos?
that's discussed if the food moves during Shabbos. We'll get to that. But we're talking about first we have to establish what the food had. Again, if you're camping, let's say you want to take, let's say you're camping, I don't know, at the campsite A, and there's no proper dwelling place around you, so you could only walk 2,000 amas northeast, south, and west, right? But you want to walk 3,800 amas north. So again, you like Aaron, you put your food, let's say, in a safe space, 1,900 amas north. And that gives you now 2,000 amas from where the food is. Again, you can't walk south anything that you've taken away. So if you move it 1,900 amas, you only have 100 amas. If you move it, 1,999, then you have 1 amma. You can't take a step away south. You have to be very careful with that. Again, it's not something common in the city, but it could be common if you're going camping. Now he said this: you can't leave your place, which is 2,000 square amas, and your space is 4 amas. It means from your 4 amas. Let's say you're out again. Why does he say in the field? Because in the city, this is more difficult. Let's say you're out in the field camping on Shabbos, as Shabbos comes in. So then you can't walk. You could only go north, east, south, and west up to 2,000 amas. But that's only if you're in the field. What happens if you're in the city? Then the whole city becomes your space. So your 2,000 amas only start outside the city where people dwell. Again, it gets complicated because no city is a square, right? The cities have, go in and go out. Houses go further north, come in. If you draw a line of the population, it's not going to be 4 square corners, right? It's going to be around the kind of a jagged circle at best. So there's the laws of and the laws of Erev Tchum, as we're going to learn, is we have to first decide what is the locked-in city space. And where do we start counting the 2,000 amas out of that space? Yes, Aaron.
Okay, here's another thing. So when I was in Boy Scouts, we'd have these jamborees. A lot of people get together. So you're camping, as you said. That's it. There's only one of you, but now there's many troops. So there might be 20, 30 troops all sitting around. Do you get all the space, all the people are around? And what if they're not all Jewish?
Okay, we're going to get to that. That's not because that's already when you have a sada and if there's people, it's not really a place of resting. It's just camping. Well, let's get to that. Okay. So first he says, the city, your 2,000 amas only start outside of the city. And he says the outskirts of the city is also considered part of the city. Means it's outside of the entirety of the city. Shivim ama ushnei shlish ama. How much do you have of the outskirts? You have of the outskirts of the city an area of 70 and 2/3 amas. We'll see what the number is over there. V'shayich li'ir afal pi she'ein sham binyan, even if there's no buildings. V'hu anikar karfei fa'ir. So that is what's called the karfei, the enclosure of the city. U'mimakem sheyichla mischilin limdei tchum Shabbos, and only outside the 72 and the 70 and 2/3 amas do we start to count to 2,000 amas. Again, in a regular city, for a regular person, this is not something that you come across all the time. Possibly where Barbara lives in the island is possibly a place that's possible. Or again, there's questions about walking from Brooklyn to Manhattan. There's those questions if you could walk that, if that's considered a problem of Eiruv Chatzeiros or not, Eiruv Tchum or not. Okay, we'll get to that obviously when we reach there. All right, let's just do the footnotes on this. Number one is, again, this applies to Yom Tov as well. It's not exclusive to Shabbos. For it's written, a man shall not go out of his space on the 7th day. It says a person should not leave his place. There's a pasuk. In Masechtas Eruvin, there is a question if the law is biblical or rabbinic enactment. So we're not sure if there's a machlokes in the Gemara if this is rabbinic or biblical. But the bottom line is we keep it either way. He says it's forbidden to walk. Some poskim rule that Yom Tov and Shabbos are equal regarding boundaries, and others say that the laws of boundaries on Yom Tov are only D'Rabbanan, rabbinically ordinated. Okay, so these are questions that are in the understanding of the law, but the bottom line is, if it's rabbinic or biblical, it's still, at the end of the day, we can't go out of that space. 3, this refers to your place of dwelling, which is determined by where you are when Shabbos begins. You then acquire the Shvisa. So where you are in Shabbos, again, if you're in the city, it's your whole city. But if you're camping, it depends where you are. Unless you make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, an Eiruv Tchumen, then the Eiruv creates where you are. You have 4 amas. This space, the space of a person who occupies, is not included in the 2,000 amas. Mishnah Berurah 396. So it's out of the 4 amas, you have 2,000 amas. Rules that with regard to Tchum, a person's place is not 4 by 4, but rather 8 by 8 amas. And the Mishnah Berurah says it's not 4 by 4, but it's 8 by 8, meaning you have 4 from each side. By twilight, if you're in a field, he says, or if you left the Tchum on Shabbos, in which case you must stop and remain in your place until the end of Shabbos. It means if you leave your city, you start walking out of the Karfif, and you walk 2,000 amas, you have to stop. You can't continue to walk. And we've learned before, the question of if a person needs to go somewhere Saturday night, are you allowed to go all the way to the Tchum on Shabbos to be ready to continue walking on Saturday night? That's kind of preparing for Motzei Shabbos and Shabbos. We've discussed that before. We'll discuss it again. But if you stay in the city, even if the city has no walls, it's not about a wall. This is just about a place where people are populated. Then you have the 2,000 amas start from there. The karfaf on top of the surrounding area gives you 70 and 2/3 amas. We'll learn that later about more. That's called the karfif, which means park or yard enclosure. I mean the kind of the park outside the city. Okay. Let's just do one more law. You have a city that's surrounded by a wall. Even if it's very large. You could walk the whole city, there's no problem. And only after the Ibur, which is the 70 and 2/3 amas, starts the 2,000 amma count. Even a city that doesn't have a wall. But the houses are near each other. So this is where Julie's question comes in. How do you check the houses? What's the distance between houses if there's no wall? If there's no wall, as long as the next house, your neighbor's house, is within 70 amas and 2/3 amas, it's not so much. 70 amas is, let's even say an amma is 18 inches. It's not a lot. It's not a lot. It's not a lot of space. So I mean, like you go to New Haven or you go to these places in where there's literally, could be a half a mile between each house. So you have to be careful because that's not, and there's no wall around it. That creates a problem. So, but as long as there's some dwelling place within 70 amas and 2/3 amas, then the house is connected, and the next house, then you go to the next house and the next house. Only from the final house that we start counting the boundaries, which means after the 70 and 2/3 amas of the last house. Okay, let's see footnote number 9 and 10. There are Bir Halacha rules like the Rambam and others who say that the karfif is added only to connect 2 cities, but is not considered in the calculation in calculating the tchum of a city. So this is the ruling of the Ramah. The Bir Halacha rules that when do we need the karfif is only if we want to connect 2 cities. So if you have 2 cities and the cities are then the kind of their extra space could connect the 2 cities. So then you can make both 2 cities into one big space, and then you could carry out of both cities 2,000 amas. But if you're just talking about if the city has no city nearby, just to add from the city walls another 70 and 2/3 feet, not everyone agrees that that's an extra space. Okay, number 10, the Ramah Bir Halacha is machmer and rules that we do not add a kafkav to a city that was extended by adding a house. Again, So according to others, the Bir Halacha says that the final house, that's it. You can't go. You start counting 2,000 from the final house. You don't get the extra space of 70 and 2/3 of Amos in these situations. Okay. Any questions before we complete the class? All righty. Shkoyach everyone for coming. And
I have one question.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay. Does any of this have to do with those houses and living as non-Jews?
We'll get to that. I don't think so. This is talking about a populated area, but let's check when we get there.
Okay.
Laila Tov, everyone, take care.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you.
Thank you.